Picture this. You've just emerged into a world where everything wants to kill you. Your own parents might eat you for breakfast, and your life expectancy is shorter than a mayfly's attention span. Welcome to being born as a Tyrannosaurus Rex, where survival isn't just challenging, it's practically impossible. You crack through your leathery shell, barely the size of a house cat, and immediately realize you've been dealt the worst hand in prehistoric poker. While other baby dinosaurs get to hang out in cozy family groups with protective parents, you're basically thrown into nature's ultimate battle royale with nothing but your wits and a prayer to whatever dinosaur gods might be listening. Here's the brutal reality nobody talks about when they're gushing over T-Rex documentaries. Those massive, terrifying adults you see crushing through forests and dominating ecosystems, they represent less than 1% of all T-Rexes ever born. The other 99% never made it past their terrible twos, and for good reason. Your first few months of existence are basically a continuous horror movie, where you're simultaneously the victim and the potential monster. Every single day is a calculated gamble between finding your next meal and becoming someone else's snack. And trust me, the odds are never in your favor. Let's start with your charming family dynamics. Your mother, that loving 40-foot behemoth who brought you into this world, has already moved on to more pressing concerns, like not starving to death herself. Maternal instinct in the T-Rex world lasts about as long as it takes for the eggs to hatch, and then it's every tiny predator for themselves. But here's where it gets really twisted. Your siblings aren't your allies in this nightmare scenario. They're your competition, and in the most literal sense possible. That adorable little hatchling next to you isn't thinking about family bonds or sibling loyalty. They're thinking about whether you look tasty enough to risk a fight over. Cannibalism among young T-Rexes wasn't just common. It was practically mandatory for survival. When food is scarce and you're surrounded by equally desperate creatures, your own size, moral boundaries tend to disappear pretty quickly. Your brother becomes lunch, your sister becomes dinner, and you spend every waking moment wondering if you'll be tomorrow's breakfast special. The environment you've been born into makes modern war zones look like peaceful vacation resorts. The late Cretaceous period was essentially nature's version of a maximum security prison, except the guards are all trying to eat you too. Massive predators patrol every territory, venomous creatures lurk in every shadow, and even the plants seem designed to cause you maximum suffering. Your tiny body, barely weighing a few pounds, offers absolutely zero protection against the countless threats surrounding you. Unlike armored dinosaurs that could at least tank a few hits, or the speedy ones that could outrun danger, you're stuck in this awkward middle ground where you're too small to fight back effectively, but too slow to escape consistently. Every step outside whatever pathetic shelter you've managed to find is a calculated risk. That rustling in the bushes could be a harmless lizard, or it could be a pack of raptors who've decided you look like the perfect bite-sized snack. That shadow passing overhead might be a cloud, or it might be a pteranodon sizing you up for an aerial takedown. And let's talk about the food situation, because it's absolutely nightmarish. Adult T-Rexes get to feast on massive hadrosaurs and triceratops, tearing through tons of meat in a single sitting. You, on the other hand, are stuck hunting creatures barely bigger than insects. And even those fights are far from guaranteed victories. Your hunting strategy at this stage basically involves sneaking up on small mammals, lizards, and whatever other tiny creatures you can actually overpower. But here's the catch. Every single one of these potential meals is also being hunted by dozens of other predators who are bigger, faster, and more experienced than you are. Competition for resources is so intense that you'll spend entire days searching for food, only to have your hard-earned meal stolen by literally any other predator in the area. A young crocodile can bully you out of your catch. A pack of small theropods can gang up and force you to abandon your prize. Even other juvenile T-Rexes will fight you tooth and nail for a single dead fish. The psychological toll of this constant survival mode is something most people never consider. You're not just physically exhausted from the endless hunt for food and shelter. You're mentally drained from the perpetual state of hypervigilance required to stay alive. Sleep becomes a luxury you can barely afford. Every sound in the night could signal approaching danger. Every moment of rest might be your last if you've chosen the wrong hiding spot. Your nervous system is constantly flooded with stress hormones, keeping you in a permanent state of fight-or-flight response that would drive most creatures insane. But perhaps the cruelest aspect of your early T-Rex existence is the complete lack of any safety net. In the modern world, even the most dangerous predators have some form of refuge or backup plan. You have absolutely nothing. No pack to fall back on, no parents to protect you, no safe territory to retreat to when things get too intense. Your growth rate during these early months is absolutely critical to your survival, but it creates its own set of problems. You need to consume massive amounts of protein to fuel your rapidly developing body. But obtaining that protein requires you to take increasingly dangerous risks. It's a vicious cycle where the very thing keeping you alive, your need to grow, is also what's most likely to get you killed. The weather adds another layer of misery to your already impossible situation. Seasonal changes bring different challenges, from drought conditions that concentrate predators around limited water sources to flooding that destroys your carefully chosen hiding spots. You have no control over these environmental factors, yet they can determine whether you live or die on any given day. Your sensory development, while eventually becoming one of your greatest assets, starts as another vulnerability. Your vision is still developing, your hearing isn't fully calibrated, and your sense of smell, though better than most, can't yet distinguish between all the different threats around you. You're essentially navigating a deadly obstacle course while half blind and partially deaf. The social dynamics of your environment add yet another layer of complexity to your survival challenge. Other young predators form loose alliances that can overwhelm you through sheer numbers. Herbivore herds coordinate their defenses in ways that make hunting them nearly impossible for a solitary juvenile. Even scavenger species work together to drive you away from carcasses you desperately need. Every single day presents you with impossible choices that adult T-Rexes never have to face. Do you risk hunting in the open where food is more plentiful, but predators can spot you easily? Do you stick to dense cover where you're harder to see but prey is scarce? Do you compete directly with other juveniles for resources, knowing that victory might mean survival, but defeat certainly means death? Your body is simultaneously your greatest asset and your biggest liability. Those developing muscles and strengthening bones represent your future dominance, but they also require constant fuel that's incredibly difficult to obtain. Your growing teeth and claws give you better hunting capabilities, but they're still no match for the fully developed weapons of adult predators who see you as an easy target. The loneliness of this existence cannot be overstated. While other dinosaur species rely on complex social structures for survival, you're completely on your own from the moment you hatch. There's no learning from experienced adults, no protection from group dynamics, no sharing of resources or information. You're forced to figure out every aspect of survival through trial and error, and most errors are fatal. The learning curve for basic survival skills is absolutely brutal when you have no teachers and unlimited ways to die. Every hunting technique, every defensive strategy, every safe hiding spot has to be discovered through personal experience. And in the T-Rex world, there are no second chances for getting it wrong. Your first successful hunt feels like winning the lottery, but that euphoria lasts about 30 seconds before reality sets in. Now you have to defend your kill from every other predator in a 5-mile radius who can smell fresh blood. That hard-earned meal becomes a beacon advertising your location to creatures that could swallow you whole without chewing. The irony is devastating. Success in finding food makes you exponentially more vulnerable to becoming food yourself. Every time you manage to take down prey, you're essentially sending up a flare signal to every carnivore in the area. Your moment of triumph becomes your moment of maximum danger. Weather patterns become your mortal enemy in ways that would make adult T-Rexes laugh if they weren't too busy being apex predators. A sudden rainstorm doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it washes away scent trails you're following, creates mud that slows your escape routes, and forces all the local predators into the same limited shelter areas where territorial disputes turn deadly. Drought conditions are even worse. Water sources become killing fields where desperate creatures of all sizes gather, creating a prehistoric version of Russian roulette every time you need a drink. You're forced to choose between dehydration and walking into what's essentially a predator convention center. Your sleep schedule becomes a master class in paranoia and strategic planning. You can't afford the luxury of deep sleep that would allow proper rest and recovery. Instead, you develop this horrible pattern of micro-naps, constantly waking to scan for threats, never fully relaxing, never truly resting. This chronic sleep deprivation affects your reaction times, decision-making abilities, and overall health in ways that compound your survival challenges. The seasonal migrations of prey animals create boom and bust cycles that test your adaptability to its absolute limits. When herds move through your territory, food becomes temporarily abundant, but so does competition from other predators who follow the same migration patterns. You're suddenly sharing hunting grounds with creatures that normally wouldn't venture into your area. Then the herds pass, leaving you in a virtual food desert where you're competing with the established local predators who know every hiding spot, every hunting ground, every escape route better than you ever will. You're the outsider trying to survive in their backyard, and they have zero interest in sharing resources with some upstart juvenile. Your growth spurts create their own special brand of torture. Just when you think you've figured out your capabilities, your body changes dramatically over the course of a few weeks. Your reach extends, your strength increases, but your coordination goes completely haywire as your brain struggles to adapt to your new proportions. During these growth phases, you're essentially learning to walk all over again while simultaneously trying to hunt, fight, and survive. It's like trying to perform surgery while someone keeps changing the length of your arms. Every movement feels awkward. Every attack misses its mark, and every escape attempt becomes a clumsy disaster. The social isolation starts affecting your mental development in ways that create long-term survival problems. Other dinosaur species learn complex behavioral patterns through observation and interaction with their groups. You're forced to reinvent every wheel yourself, making countless mistakes that proper social learning would have prevented. Territory becomes this impossible puzzle where every solution creates new problems. Claim an area too small and you'll starve from insufficient resources. Claim an area too large and you can't defend it effectively from other juveniles or adult predators who decide they want your space. Find the perfect territory, and you can guarantee that something bigger and nastier has already claimed it. Your scavenging attempts become exercises in calculated desperation. Following adult T-Rexes to their kills sounds like a solid strategy, until you realize that approaching an actively feeding 40-foot predator is essentially suicide. But waiting for them to finish means competing with every other scavenger in the area for whatever scraps remain. The hierarchy of scavengers is ruthlessly enforced through violence. And guess where a juvenile T-Rex ranks in that pecking order? Somewhere between completely ignored and actively bullied away from food sources. Adult pteranodons will dive bomb you away from carcasses. Packs of smaller theropods will coordinate to overwhelm you. Even the crocodiles show you zero respect. Your hunting success rate hovers somewhere around the same percentage as your chances of winning the prehistoric lottery. The small prey you can actually catch and kill represents maybe 5% of the protein you need to maintain healthy growth. The rest has to come from increasingly desperate strategies that put you in progressively more dangerous situations. Ambush hunting becomes your specialty by necessity, but it requires perfect timing, flawless execution, and more luck than skill. You spend hours motionless in uncomfortable positions, waiting for the perfect opportunity that might never come. When it does come, you get exactly one chance to make it work before your prey either escapes or calls for backup. The energy economics of your existence make absolutely no sense from a survival perspective. You're burning massive amounts of calories just staying alert and mobile enough to avoid becoming someone's dinner. Meanwhile, you're taking in barely enough nutrition to maintain basic bodily functions. let alone fuel the rapid growth necessary to eventually become a dominant predator. Your immune system operates under constant stress, making you vulnerable to diseases and infections that would barely affect a healthy, well-fed juvenile. A minor injury becomes a potential death sentence when you can't afford to slow down for proper healing. Every cut, bruise, or strain weakens your already precarious position in the food chain. The psychological warfare of constant predation pressure creates behavioral patterns that will haunt you for life, assuming you survive long enough to have a life. You develop this hypervigilant paranoia that makes normal dinosaur social interactions nearly impossible. Trust becomes a foreign concept when every creature you encounter has either tried to eat you or steal your food. Your territorial instincts start developing during this period, but they're completely at odds with your survival needs. Every fiber of your genetic programming screams at you to establish and defend your own space. But claiming territory as a juvenile T-Rex is like painting a target on your back for every adult predator in the region. The mating displays you witness from adult T-Rexes become both inspiration and torment. You see these massive, confident predators engaging in complex courtship behaviors, demonstrating the kind of strength and dominance you can only dream of achieving. Meanwhile, you're hiding behind rocks, trying not to get stepped on by the very creatures you hope to become. Seasonal food shortages push you to the absolute brink of starvation multiple times throughout your juvenile period. During these lean times, you're forced to consider food sources that would normally be beneath your dignity as a future apex predator. Insects, carrion so rotten it's barely recognizable. Even plant matter in desperate moments when protein sources completely disappear. Your developing hunting skills create false confidence that regularly gets you into life-threatening situations. You successfully take down a few small prey animals and start thinking you're ready for bigger challenges. Then you attempt to hunt something just slightly larger than your usual targets and discover that the difficulty curve in prehistoric predation is more like a cliff than a slope. The constant stress hormones flooding your system during this period literally reshape your brain development. Your fight or flight responses become so hyperactive that you'll spend adult life jumping at shadows and overreacting to minor threats. The psychological scars of juvenile survival create behavioral quirks that persist long after you've gained the size and strength to dominate your environment. Weather becomes your personal nightmare in ways that adult T-Rexes will never understand. That torrential downpour that barely inconveniences a fully grown predator. For you, it's a death sentence wrapped in water droplets. Your tiny body loses heat faster than a leaky radiator, and hypothermia becomes a very real threat when you can't find adequate shelter. But the rain creates other problems that are somehow even worse. All those scent trails you've been carefully following to locate potential prey, gone, washed away like your hopes and dreams. The mud turns every step into a potential trap, slowing your already pathetic escape speed to something resembling a three-legged turtle having an existential crisis. And then there's the flooding. When water levels rise, every predator in a 10-mile radius gets forced into the same high ground you're desperately trying to reach. Suddenly, you're playing musical chairs with creatures that could use you as a toothpick, and there aren't nearly enough safe spots to go round. It's like being trapped in an elevator with a bunch of serial killers. Except the elevator is a hilltop, and everyone's starving. The drought seasons bring their own special brand of torture that makes you question whether survival is even worth the effort. Water sources shrink to tiny oases that become prehistoric thunderdomes where only the strongest survive. You need water to live, but approaching these drinking spots is like volunteering for gladiator combat against opponents who outweigh you by several tons. Every watering hole becomes a carefully orchestrated dance of death. You have to time your approach perfectly, waiting for moments when the bigger predators are distracted or temporarily absent. But even then, you're sharing space with desperate creatures of all sizes who are just as thirsty and just as willing to kill for access to that life-giving liquid. The social dynamics around these water sources create hierarchies that make high school cafeteria politics look simple. Adult T-Rexes drink first, obviously. Then the other large predators get their turn. Then the medium-sized ones. Then the small ones. And finally, if you're incredibly lucky and nothing goes wrong, juvenile T-Rexes might get 30 seconds to frantically lap up whatever contaminated dregs remain. But here's the real kicker about drought season. The prey animals are just as desperate as you are. Those small mammals and reptiles you've been hunting, they're now competing with you for the same water sources, which means your food supply is concentrated in the exact same locations where you're most likely to become someone else's food supply. It's predator efficiency at its most brutal. Your sleeping arrangements during these early months would make a homeless person weep with sympathy. Forget about comfortable nests or protective burrows. Those are luxuries for species that have parents who actually care about their offspring's survival. You're stuck with whatever temporary shelter you can scrape together from debris, fallen logs, and pure desperation. The constant relocation becomes exhausting in ways that go beyond physical fatigue. Every few days, you have to abandon your carefully chosen hiding spot because either you've been discovered by something that wants to eat you, or the local food supply is dried up, or another juvenile has decided they like your real estate better than their own. Each move requires scouting new territory, learning new escape routes, identifying new threats, and establishing new hunting grounds. It's like being forced to start over from scratch every single week, except the learning curve involves life-or-death decisions, and there's no instruction manual written in a language you understand. Your hunting strategies during this period make guerrilla warfare look straightforward. You can't afford direct confrontations with anything larger than a bread box. So every meal requires elaborate planning that would impress military strategists. You spend hours observing potential prey, studying their movement patterns, identifying their weaknesses, and calculating the exact moment when an ambush might actually succeed. But even your most carefully planned attacks fail more often than they succeed. That lizard you've been stalking for 3 hours, it spots you at the last second and disappears into a crevice too small for you to follow. That small mammal you've cornered, its friends show up for a group eating that leaves you bloody and still hungry. That fish you thought was already dead. Turns out it was just resting and has some very sharp teeth. The energy expenditure of failed hunting attempts create this horrible cycle where unsuccessful hunts leave you weaker and less capable of succeeding in future hunts. You're burning calories you can't afford to lose while failing to gain the calories you desperately need. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom while someone keeps making the hole bigger. Your growth spurts create coordination disasters that would be hilarious if they weren't potentially fatal. One week, you know exactly how far you can reach, how high you can jump, how fast you can run. The next week, your body has changed so dramatically that you're essentially learning to operate a completely different machine while under fire. These awkward phases make hunting nearly impossible and escaping from threats even more challenging. You'll attempt a leap you could easily make last month, only to discover your legs are now 3 inches longer and your timing is completely off. You'll try to squeeze through a hiding spot that used to fit perfectly, only to get stuck halfway through while something with very large teeth approaches from behind. The learning curve for basic predator skills becomes a master class in trial and error, emphasis on the error part. Adult T-Rexes make killing look effortless, but they've had decades to perfect their techniques. You're starting from absolute zero with no teachers, no practice sessions, and consequences that range from going hungry to becoming lunch. Every aspect of predation requires skills you haven't developed yet. Stalking requires patience you don't possess. Ambushing requires timing you haven't mastered. Killing requires strength and technique you're still developing. And all of this has to be learned while actively avoiding becoming the prey yourself. Your bite force, while impressive for your size, is still pathetically weak compared to what you'll eventually develop. Those sharp little teeth that seem so intimidating to small prey are basically useless against anything with decent armor or thick hide. You're bringing a butter knife to a sword fight, except everyone else has bazookas. The psychological impact of constant failure weighs on you in ways that create long-term behavioral problems. Every missed hunt, every lost meal, every narrow escape from becoming someone's dinner reinforces the message that you're weak, incompetent, and probably doomed. This negative feedback loop affects your confidence, decision-making, and willingness to take necessary risks. Your territorial instincts start developing during this period, creating internal conflicts that make survival even more complicated. Part of your brain insists you should be claiming and defending your own space like a proper predator. The rational part of your brain points out that territorial behavior for a juvenile T-Rex is essentially suicide by advertisement. But those instincts are powerful and persistent, leading to stupid decisions that put you in unnecessary danger. You'll find yourself getting aggressive over a particularly good hunting spot, even when backing down would be the smarter choice. You'll waste energy marking territory you can't actually defend, sending signals to larger predators that there's a cocky juvenile in the area who needs to be taught a lesson. The seasonal migrations create boom and bust cycles that test your adaptability to its breaking point. When the great herds pass through your area, The ecosystem temporarily explodes with opportunities. Prey animals are everywhere. Predator attention is divided among multiple targets, and the chaos creates chances for a clever juvenile to grab some easy meals. But these migration periods also attract every serious predator within a 100-mile radius. Adult T-Rexes converge on the migration routes like prehistoric food trucks following concert tours. Suddenly, your quiet little territory becomes Grand Central Station for creatures that could step on you without noticing. The feast or famine nature of these events wreaks havoc on your developing metabolism. During migration season, you might actually manage to eat well for a few weeks, building up fat reserves and growing stronger. Then the herds move on, taking most of the prey with them, and you're back to starvation rations while competing with all those visiting predators who decided they like your neighborhood. Your scavenging attempts become exercises in calculated humiliation. Following adult predators to their kills sounds like a reasonable strategy until you actually try it. Approaching a feeding T-Rex is like trying to pet a tornado. Theoretically possible, practically suicidal, and guaranteed to end poorly for everyone involved. Even when you manage to locate fresh kills that have been temporarily abandoned, the competition is fierce and the hierarchy is brutally enforced. Adult scavengers will physically attack you to drive you away from carcasses, even when there's plenty of meat to go around. They're not just protecting food. They're establishing dominance and teaching you your place in the pecking order. The few times you actually manage to claim some scraps from a larger kill, you have to eat as fast as physically possible while constantly watching for threats. It's impossible to properly digest your food when you're in a permanent state of fight-or-flight response. Your stomach churns with stress hormones while you're trying to process the nutrition you desperately need. Your social isolation becomes more psychologically damaging as you get older and more aware of what you're missing. You watch other dinosaur species cooperating, sharing resources, teaching their young, and protecting each other. Meanwhile, you haven't had a positive social interaction since you hatched, and every creature you encounter sees you as either food, competition, or an annoyance. The loneliness affects your brain development in ways that create lasting behavioral problems. Social skills that should be learned during this juvenile period never develop properly. Communication patterns that other predators take for granted remain mysteries to you. The complex territorial negotiations that adult T-Rexes engage in might as well be performed in a foreign language. Your first successful hunt feels like winning the lottery, curing cancer, and discovering fire all at the same time. After weeks or months of failures, near misses, and humiliating defeats, you finally manage to take down a prey animal that's actually worth eating. The surge of pride and accomplishment is intoxicating, making you feel like maybe you actually have what it takes to survive this nightmare. But that euphoria lasts approximately 30 seconds before reality crashes down like a meteor. Your successful hunt has just created a whole new set of problems that are potentially worse than starvation. The scent of fresh blood carries for miles in every direction, advertising your location to every predator in the region. You've essentially lit a flare and fired it into the sky with a note attached saying, "Free meal over here." Now, you have to defend your kill while simultaneously trying to eat as much as possible before you're forced to abandon it. Every second you spend feeding is a second you're not watching for threats. Every second you spend watching for threats is a second you're not getting the nutrition you desperately need. It's an impossible balancing act that usually ends with you losing both the food and nearly losing your life. The irony is crushing. Success in hunting makes you exponentially more vulnerable to predation. Your moment of triumph becomes your moment of maximum danger. That hard-earned meal transforms from a solution to your problems into the cause of entirely new problems that are potentially fatal. Your developing senses create their own special challenges during this period. Your vision is improving, but it's still not calibrated properly for judging distances or identifying threats quickly enough. You'll spot movement in your peripheral vision and waste precious energy investigating what turns out to be wind-blown vegetation. Or worse, you'll dismiss actual threats as harmless environmental movement. Your hearing is becoming more acute, but you haven't learned to filter important sounds from background noise. Every rustling leaf sounds like an approaching predator. Every distant roar sends you into panic mode, even when it's miles away and moving in the opposite direction. The constant false alarms exhaust your stress response system and make you less capable of reacting appropriately to real threats. Your sense of smell is developing into what will eventually become one of your greatest assets. But during this learning phase, it's more hindrance than help. You can detect scents that indicate danger or opportunity, but you can't yet interpret them accurately. That smell might indicate a fresh kill nearby, or it might indicate a large predator that's about to make you into a fresh kill. The learning process for scent interpretation requires exposure to different situations, but every new situation you encounter is potentially your last. You need experience to develop expertise, but gaining that experience requires surviving encounters that could easily kill you. It's like learning to defuse bombs while people are actively throwing live grenades at you. Your immune system operates under constant stress, making you vulnerable to diseases and infections that would barely affect a healthy, well-fed juvenile. A minor cut becomes a potential death sentence when you can't afford to slow down for proper healing. Every scrape, bite, or puncture wound becomes an entry point for bacteria that could kill you more slowly, but just as effectively as any predator. The chronic malnutrition weakens your body's ability to fight off infections, creating a downward spiral where poor health makes hunting more difficult, which leads to worse nutrition, which further compromises your health. You're trapped in a biological feedback loop that seems designed to eliminate weak individuals from the gene pool. Your sleep patterns become completely disrupted by the constant threat of predation. Deep, restorative sleep is a luxury you can't afford when closing your eyes for more than a few minutes might mean never opening them again. Instead, you develop this horrible pattern of micro-naps, constantly waking to scan for threats, never fully relaxing, never truly resting. The chronic sleep deprivation affects every aspect of your physical and mental performance. Your reaction times slow down when you need them to be lightning fast. Your decision-making abilities deteriorate when every choice could be your last. Your memory formation suffers, making it harder to learn from experience and avoid repeating dangerous mistakes. The psychological toll of this constant hypervigilance would drive most creatures insane. Your nervous system remains in a permanent state of high alert, flooding your body with stress hormones that are meant for short-term emergency situations, not chronic lifestyle maintenance. The long-term effects of this biochemical warfare against your own body create health problems that persist well into adulthood. Your growth rate during this period becomes a cruel joke played by evolution. You need to grow quickly to reach a size where you can defend yourself effectively. But rapid growth requires massive amounts of protein that you can't reliably obtain. You're caught between the biological imperative to develop quickly and the practical impossibility of feeding that development adequately. The protein deficiency affects not just your size, but your bone density, muscle development, and neurological growth. You might survive long enough to reach adult size, but the nutritional deficits during this critical development period create weaknesses that will haunt you for the rest of your life, assuming, of course, that you actually have a rest of your life. Your jaw development becomes this twisted evolutionary paradox that makes absolutely no sense from a survival perspective. Those teeth that will eventually grow into bone-crushing instruments of death. Right now, they're about as intimidating as toothpicks made from wet cardboard. You've got the dental equipment of a future apex predator trapped in the bite force of an angry hamster. Every feeding attempt becomes a master class in frustration and mechanical failure. You'll latch on to prey that should be easy to dispatch, only to discover that your juvenile jaws can't generate enough pressure to finish the job quickly. What should be a clean kill turns into this embarrassing wrestling match where your dinner has plenty of time to fight back, call for help, or simply wiggle free while you're trying to figure out how biting is supposed to work. The worst part is watching other predators your age who've already figured out their hunting equipment. Raptors are slicing through prey with surgical precision. Young crocodiles are executing death rolls that would make professional wrestlers jealous. Meanwhile, you're over here trying to gum something to death while hoping nobody notices your complete lack of killing competence. Your tail, which will eventually become a devastating weapon capable of shattering bones, currently serves about as much purpose as a wet noodle in a sword fight. Adult T-Rexes use their massive tails for balance during high-speed pursuits and powerful strikes during combat. Your tail mostly just gets in the way and occasionally trips you during the most inconvenient moments possible. The balance issues created by your rapidly changing proportions turn every movement into a potential disaster. Your head is growing faster than your body can compensate for, creating this top-heavy nightmare that makes simple tasks like walking in a straight line feel like advanced physics. Forget about running. That's basically controlled falling with style. And the style part is definitely optional. Your arms, destined to become one of the most debated features of your adult anatomy, currently exist in this bizarre limbo where they're too small to be useful, but too prominent to ignore. They're not quite vestigial yet, but they're certainly not pulling their weight in the survival department. It's like evolution couldn't decide what to do with them, so it just left them hanging around as decorative accessories. The temperature regulation of your developing body creates problems that would make reptilian ancestors laugh if they weren't too busy being extinct. You're stuck in this awkward transitional phase where your metabolism is revving up toward warm-blooded efficiency, but your size is too small to maintain consistent body heat. Cold nights become endurance tests that drain energy you can't spare. Hot days present their own special torture as your underdeveloped cooling systems struggle to prevent overheating. You're forced to seek shade during the peak hunting hours when prey is most active, creating this impossible choice between staying comfortable and staying fed. Neither option leads anywhere good, but both are better than the alternative of becoming a prehistoric heat stroke statistic. Your developing vision creates depth perception nightmares that turn simple jumps into life-threatening gambles. Those eye sockets that will eventually house some of the most powerful optical equipment in natural history are currently hosting what amounts to biological prototypes. You can see movement, you can detect shapes, but accurately judging distances requires more luck than skill. This visual uncertainty turns every leap, pounce, or dodge into a calculated guess with potentially fatal consequences. You'll commit to an attack based on what you think you're seeing, only to discover mid-flight that your target was either much closer or much farther than your brain calculated. The number of face-first collisions with rocks, trees, and confused prey animals becomes genuinely embarrassing. Your hearing development follows a similar pattern of cruel irony. Those ears that will eventually detect the heartbeat of prey from hundreds of yards away are currently about as selective as a broken radio. You can hear everything, but you can't distinguish between important sounds and meaningless background noise. Every falling leaf sounds like approaching footsteps. Every distant bird call might be a predator's hunting cry. The constant auditory overload exhausts your nervous system and creates decision paralysis when split-second reactions mean the difference between survival and becoming someone's afternoon snack. You waste precious energy investigating false alarms while simultaneously missing real threats because they're buried in the cacophony of environmental noise your brain can't yet filter effectively. Your scent-tracking abilities, which will eventually become legendary among prehistoric predators, currently operate with all the precision of a blindfolded person trying to navigate a maze. You can smell interesting things, but interpreting what those smells mean requires experience you haven't gained and wisdom you haven't developed. That enticing aroma might lead to a fresh kill or straight into a predator's ambush. The frustration of having powerful senses that you don't know how to use properly creates this constant state of sensory confusion. Your brain is receiving more information than it can process, but not enough reliable information to make confident decisions. It's like having a supercomputer running on dial-up internet. Technically impressive, practically useless. Your social development becomes increasingly warped by the complete absence of any positive role models or teaching opportunities. Other dinosaur species learn complex behavioral patterns through observation and mimicry of successful adults. You're forced to reinvent every aspect of predatory behavior through trial and error, with emphasis on the error part and potentially fatal consequences for getting it wrong. The lack of proper socialization creates behavioral quirks that will persist long into adulthood. You develop these weird little habits and preferences based on whatever random strategies helped you survive specific situations. Maybe you only hunt during certain weather conditions because that's when you had early success. Maybe you avoid certain types of terrain because you nearly died there once. These survival adaptations become psychological limitations that restrict your future effectiveness. Your territorial instincts begin manifesting during this period, but they're completely at odds with your survival needs and current capabilities. Every fiber of your genetic programming screams that you should be claiming and defending your own space like a proper predator. Meanwhile, the rational part of your brain points out that territorial behavior for something your size is essentially a suicide note written in pheromones. But instincts don't care about logic, and you find yourself getting possessive over hunting grounds you can't actually defend, food sources you can't reliably access, and shelter locations that offer more psychological comfort than actual protection. These territorial impulses lead to confrontations with other juveniles that waste energy and create unnecessary risks. The hierarchy among juvenile predators becomes this brutal social experiment where everyone's trying to establish dominance while simultaneously avoiding anything that might attract adult attention. You're all competing for the same limited resources, but open conflict draws the kind of attention that gets entire groups of juveniles eliminated by passing adults who find the noise annoying. Your first territorial dispute feels like a pivotal moment in your development. Finally, a chance to prove you're not just another piece of prey waiting to be consumed. The reality is far less glorious and far more terrifying than your instincts promised. That other juvenile you're facing down has been through the same survival nightmare you have, which means they're just as desperate, just as hungry, and just as willing to risk everything for a slight advantage. The fight itself becomes this awkward dance of inexperience and desperation. Neither of you has any real idea how to conduct proper predator combat, so it devolves into this embarrassing grappling match where technique takes a back seat to determination and luck. You're essentially two amateur boxers trying to knock each other out while wearing blindfolds and mittens. Even victory in these juvenile conflicts comes with a price that makes success feel like failure. You've established temporary dominance over a small piece of territory and maybe secured access to a slightly better hunting ground. But you've also announced your presence to every adult predator in the area, identified yourself as a potential threat worth eliminating, and probably sustained injuries that compromise your future survival chances. The energy expenditure of territorial disputes creates another impossible equation in your daily survival calculations. Fighting burns calories you can't afford to lose, while potentially providing access to resources that might help you gain those calories back. The math never quite works out in your favor, but the alternative of backing down from every confrontation guarantees you'll never secure the resources necessary for long-term survival. Your hunting strategies evolve through this bizarre process of accidental discovery and desperate improvisation. Every successful technique you develop comes from random circumstances that probably can't be replicated reliably. You managed to catch a fish because it was already injured and swimming slowly. You take down a small mammal because it wandered into the perfect ambush position. These flukes become the foundation of your hunting repertoire. The problem with learning through luck is that luck isn't a sustainable strategy. Those perfect conditions that allowed for early success rarely repeat themselves, leaving you with hunting techniques that work maybe one time out of 50 attempts. You spend enormous amounts of time and energy trying to recreate situations that were essentially miraculous accidents. Your growing awareness of your own mortality becomes this constant background terror that affects every decision and colors every experience. Unlike prey animals that can rely on herd protection or herbivores that face primarily seasonal threats, you're acutely conscious that death could come from any direction at any moment for any reason or no reason at all. This existential dread creates decision paralysis in situations where quick action is essential. You'll spot a hunting opportunity and spend precious seconds calculating all the ways it could go wrong instead of committing to the attack while the chance exists. By the time you've convinced yourself to act, the moment has passed and you're back to square one with an empty stomach and diminished confidence. The psychological weight of constant mortality awareness changes your relationship with risk in ways that create long-term behavioral problems. You either become paralyzingly cautious, missing opportunities because you're too afraid of the consequences, or recklessly aggressive, taking unnecessary chances because you've accepted that death is inevitable anyway. Your sleep becomes this horrible compromise between the rest your growing body desperately needs and the vigilance required to wake up alive. You develop these micro-sleep patterns where you never fully lose consciousness, constantly hovering in this twilight state where part of your brain remains alert for threats while the rest tries to recover from the day's survival efforts. The chronic exhaustion affects your hunting performance, reaction times, and decision-making abilities in ways that compound all your other survival challenges. You're operating at maybe 60% capacity when you need to be performing at 110% just to break even in the prehistoric arms race. Your growth spurts create coordination disasters that would be hilarious in any other context. One day, you know exactly how your body moves and responds to your mental commands. The next day, your proportions have shifted enough that every movement feels foreign and unpredictable. It's like learning to drive a different car every week while people are shooting at you. These awkward phases make hunting nearly impossible and escaping from threats even more challenging. You'll attempt a leap that should be well within your capabilities, only to discover your legs are now configured differently and your timing is completely wrong. The learning curve for adapting to your changing body never ends, and the consequences for miscalculation remain consistently fatal. Your bite force gradually increases throughout this period, but the improvement feels agonizingly slow when measured against your daily survival needs. Each week brings marginal gains in jaw strength that might help with slightly larger prey, but the gap between your current capabilities and what you actually need remains discouragingly vast. The frustration of incremental progress while facing immediate threats creates this horrible sense that you're always just one breakthrough away from turning the corner. But that breakthrough never quite materializes. Your hunting success rate improves from abysmal to merely terrible, which feels like progress until you realize that terrible still means you're probably going to starve. Your developing pack instincts begin manifesting in weird ways that don't quite make sense for a species that doesn't actually form packs. You find yourself drawn to other juveniles not out of social need, but from some deep genetic memory of cooperative hunting strategies that your lineage abandoned millions of years ago. These impulses create confusion and lead to awkward encounters that usually end poorly for everyone involved. The longing for companionship conflicts with the reality that every other creature you encounter represents either competition for resources or a potential threat to your survival. You want allies, but you can't afford allies. You need cooperation, but cooperation requires trust that could get you killed. It's an emotional paradox that has no satisfying resolution. Your first winter becomes this extended nightmare that tests every survival skill you've developed and reveals gaps in your preparation that you didn't know existed. The cold weather drives prey animals into deeper hiding, making hunting exponentially more difficult just when you need more calories to maintain body temperature. It's like nature decided to make your already impossible situation completely hopeless. The scarcity of food during winter months forces you to consider protein sources that would normally be beneath your dignity as a future apex predator. Insects become legitimate meal options. Carrion so decomposed it's barely recognizable as former life becomes gourmet dining. Even plant matter starts looking appetizing when the alternative is starvation. Your body's attempt to build fat reserves for winter insulation creates this cruel catch-22, where you need to eat more to prepare for the lean months. But the approach of winter is already making food scarcer and harder to obtain. You're trying to save for a rainy day while it's already pouring and your roof is leaking. The shorter daylight hours compress your hunting opportunities into increasingly narrow windows, while extending the dangerous nighttime periods when you're most vulnerable to nocturnal predators. Your daily schedule becomes this frantic race to secure enough food during the brief daylight hours to survive the extended darkness that follows. The hibernation strategies that work for other species become impossible fantasies when you're a rapidly growing predator with a metabolism that refuses to slow down. While mammals can curl up in burrows and wait for spring, your body demands can't be paused or constant fuel to support development that postponed. You're stuck in this biological prison where stopping means dying, but continuing means probably dying anyway. Your hunting grounds become increasingly barren as winter deepens, forcing you into territories controlled by established predators who've claimed all the prime spots for themselves. You're pushed into marginal areas where prey is scarce and shelter is inadequate, essentially being exiled to the prehistoric equivalent of the worst neighborhoods while trying to compete with residents who know every hiding spot and escape route. The ice and snow create mobility challenges that turn simple movement into exhausting ordeals. Those claws that work perfectly on dry ground become liability hazards on slippery surfaces. Your developing sense of balance, already compromised by rapid growth spurts, becomes completely unreliable when every step might result in a catastrophic fall that leaves you injured and exposed. Your breathing becomes visible in the cold air, creating these little puffs of vapor that advertise your location to any predator with functioning eyesight. Stealth hunting becomes nearly impossible when your respiratory system is essentially sending up smoke signals every few seconds. It's like trying to hide while wearing a neon sign that flashes your coordinates. The longer nights extend the periods when you're most vulnerable to creatures that hunt in darkness. Your developing night vision isn't quite adequate for the extended blackout periods, leaving you essentially blind for hours at a time while sharing territory with predators who've evolved specifically for nocturnal hunting. You become the obvious target in a game where you can't see the other players. Your first major injury becomes this terrifying glimpse into how quickly everything can fall apart when your survival depends on perfect physical performance. Maybe it's a twisted ankle from a poorly calculated jump, or claw marks from a territorial dispute that went sideways. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. Suddenly, you're operating at reduced capacity, when reduced capacity equals death sentence. The healing process requires rest and nutrition, two luxuries that don't exist in your current lifestyle. You need to slow down to recover, but slowing down means missing hunting opportunities and becoming more vulnerable to predators who can sense weakness from miles away. It's like trying to repair a race car while driving it at full speed through a demolition derby. Every limp advertises your vulnerability to every predator in the area. That slight favor of your left leg tells experienced hunters that you're compromised prey worth investigating. Your reduced mobility makes escape more difficult and hunting success even more unlikely. The injury becomes this cascading failure that affects every aspect of your survival strategy. Your pain tolerance develops through necessity rather than choice, as you learn to function with levels of discomfort that would incapacitate most creatures. Hunger becomes your constant companion, a gnawing emptiness that never quite goes away even after successful hunts. Exhaustion becomes your default state, with brief periods of slightly less tired serving as your version of feeling rested. The psychological adaptation to chronic suffering creates mental changes that will persist long into adulthood. You develop this grim acceptance of misery as the natural state of existence, making it difficult to recognize opportunities for improvement or positive change when they eventually present themselves. Survival mode becomes so ingrained that you forget other modes exist. Your social skills atrophy through complete lack of practice with positive interactions. Every creature you encounter falls into one of three categories: things that want to eat you, things that want to steal your food, or things that want to take your territory. The concept of mutually beneficial relationships becomes as foreign as the idea of flying without wings. This social isolation creates behavioral patterns that make future cooperation nearly impossible. You develop these weird little habits and paranoid responses based on survival situations that don't necessarily apply to normal predator interactions. Trust becomes such a foreign concept that you'll sabotage potentially beneficial relationships because your brain can't process the idea that other creatures might not be actively plotting your demise. Your hunting success rate slowly improves from completely hopeless to merely abysmal, which feels like tremendous progress until you realize that abysmal still means you're hungry most of the time. Each successful kill feels like winning the lottery, creating these brief moments of euphoria that are quickly crushed by the reality that tomorrow you'll need to win the lottery again. The feast or famine cycle wreaks havoc on your developing digestive system as you alternate between starvation and gorging yourself whenever food becomes available. Your stomach capacity increases to handle large meals when they occur, but your body struggles to efficiently process the massive nutrient influxes after extended periods of deprivation. Your metabolic confusion leads to energy crashes that occur at the worst possible moments. You'll finally secure a decent meal, feel energized and confident for a few hours, then suddenly hit this wall where your body shuts down for emergency maintenance. These crashes happen randomly and leave you completely vulnerable during the recovery period. Your growth pattern becomes this erratic stop-and-start process that creates proportional nightmares throughout your development. Periods of adequate nutrition allow for rapid growth spurts that change your entire body configuration in a matter of weeks. Extended hungry periods halt development entirely, creating these weird asymmetrical growth phases where different body parts develop at different rates. The result is this constantly changing physical form that makes mastering any skill nearly impossible. Just when you figure out how to coordinate your current body configuration for hunting or fighting, everything changes again, and you're back to being a clumsy disaster trying to learn basic motor skills while dodging death on a daily basis. Your territorial awareness expands as you grow larger, but your ability to defend territory remains laughably inadequate. You can sense boundaries and understand the concept of claimed space, but you lack the size, strength, or reputation necessary to enforce your own claims. You're essentially a squatter in your own ideal habitat, hoping nobody notices you're there. The frustration of understanding what you should have but being unable to claim it creates this constant low-level rage that affects your decision-making and risk assessment. You'll make stupid choices based on territorial pride rather than survival logic, leading to confrontations you can't win and situations that compromise your long-term prospects. Your sleep patterns become increasingly disrupted as your awareness of danger grows more sophisticated. Early in your development, ignorance provided some protection from anxiety. You didn't know enough to be properly terrified. Now, you understand exactly how many different ways you could die, and that knowledge makes restful sleep nearly impossible. The chronic sleep deprivation compounds every other problem you're facing. Your reaction times slow when you need them to be lightning fast. Your decision-making deteriorates when every choice could be your last. Your immune system weakens when you're already vulnerable to infections and diseases that could kill you more slowly, but just as effectively as any predator. Your developing aggression creates internal conflicts between the predator you're becoming and the vulnerable juvenile you still are. Those killer instincts are starting to manifest, making you want to dominate and control your environment. But your current capabilities make acting on those instincts incredibly dangerous, creating this psychological tension between what you want to do and what you can actually accomplish. The mismatch between your mental programming and your physical reality leads to poor decisions and unnecessary risks. You'll challenge creatures you should avoid, claim resources you can't defend, and make territorial displays that attract the wrong kind of attention. Your brain is writing checks that your body can't cash, and the bounced check fees are measured in blood and broken bones. Your first successful defense of a kill becomes this pivotal moment that feels like graduating to the next level of predator status. You manage to take down decent-sized prey and actually keep it long enough to eat most of it before being driven away by larger scavengers. The victory tastes better than the meat itself, providing psychological nourishment that's almost as important as the physical calories. But success creates its own problems, as your growing confidence leads to increasingly ambitious hunting attempts that push the boundaries of your current capabilities. You start targeting prey that's just slightly too large, just slightly too dangerous, just slightly too well defended. These marginal decisions create situations where success is unlikely and failure could be catastrophic. Your relationship with other juveniles becomes increasingly complex as you all grow larger and more capable. Early in development, encounters with other young T-Rexes were mostly about avoiding each other to prevent competition. Now these meetings become tense negotiations where everyone's trying to establish dominance hierarchies while avoiding conflicts that could attract adult attention. The juvenile social dynamics create these weird, temporary alliances that form and dissolve based on immediate circumstances rather than long-term strategy. You might cooperate with another juvenile to drive away a third competitor, then immediately turn on your temporary ally when a food source becomes available. Trust becomes a luxury none of you can afford. Your growing size finally reaches the point where some of the smaller predators that used to bully you away from carcasses start showing you a bit more respect. It's not quite fear yet, but there's definitely increased caution in how they approach confrontations with you. This slight shift in the power dynamic feels like a major victory after months of being everyone's favorite victim. The psychological impact of no longer being at the absolute bottom of the food chain cannot be overstated. For the first time since hatching, you're not automatically the weakest creature in every encounter. Some fights are still impossible to win, but others have become genuinely uncertain outcomes rather than guaranteed defeats. Your hunting strategies begin incorporating more direct approaches as your strength and speed improve. Those elaborate ambush tactics that were necessary for survival when you weighed 10 pounds become less critical now that you can overpower some prey through brute force. The transition from stealth predator to power predator feels like unlocking new abilities in some cosmic video game. But increased size brings increased caloric requirements, creating this cruel escalation where your growing body demands more food just when your hunting success starts improving. You need to kill larger prey more frequently, pushing you into competition with predators who've been playing this game much longer than you have. Your territorial instincts finally have some backing in physical reality, allowing you to claim and hold small patches of hunting ground that would have been impossible to defend as a smaller juvenile. The ability to mark and maintain territory feels like claiming your first piece of the world, a tangible sign that you might actually survive long enough to become a real predator. The responsibility of defending territory creates new stresses and challenges that test skills you're still developing. You need to patrol boundaries, respond to incursions, and maintain the kind of consistent presence that discourages other predators from testing your resolve. It's like running a small business where the competition uses violence instead of price wars. Your growing reputation among local predators becomes this double-edged sword that brings both respect and increased scrutiny. Smaller creatures give you more space, but larger predators start viewing you as a potential threat worth eliminating before you become a real problem. Your success makes you more visible to exactly the wrong kind of attention. The adolescent growth phase brings coordination challenges that make your earlier awkwardness look graceful by comparison. Your body is adding mass and strength at rates that your nervous system can't quite keep up with. Every movement feels like operating heavy machinery without proper training, powerful but unpredictable. Your bite force finally reaches levels that make hunting medium-sized prey realistic rather than purely aspirational. Those jaws that were embarrassingly weak for so long start delivering the kind of crushing power that can end fights quickly and efficiently. The psychological impact of having a truly dangerous weapon changes how you approach every interaction. Your developing roar becomes this source of pride and experimentation as you test different vocalizations to see what kind of responses they generate. Early attempts sound more like large bird calls than intimidating predator announcements, but gradual improvement provides feedback that you're heading in the right direction. The acoustic territory marking allows you to communicate your presence and intentions without the energy expenditure of physical confrontations. A well-timed roar can resolve territorial disputes before they escalate to violence, saving calories and reducing injury risk while establishing your growing status among local predators. Your night vision finally develops to the point where extended darkness becomes opportunity rather than extended vulnerability. Those hunting hours that used to be complete write-offs now become productive time when many prey animals are active and competing predators are less vigilant. The expanded hunting schedule allows for more flexible strategies and reduces the pressure on daylight hours that used to feel impossibly compressed. You can afford to be more selective